Get connected. You're listening to Get Connected. Thanks for joining us. In this series, we discuss the various issues shaping your industry, how the changes in supplier ecosystems impact the way you work on a daily basis, how your customers consume the services you create, and how the industry as a whole steps up to the demands of the digital marketplace. Let's get connected.
Hello, listener. Let's get connected. My name is Chris Lewis. By day, I'm an independent industry analyst. And by night, as you may know by now, I'm a podcaster. Welcome to Get Connected, where we delve into the issues shaping the networking industry and the experiences we all benefit from by being better connected. In this episode, we're talking about the MultiService Edge. This new confluence of services coming from the cloud, the network, and the IT environments, which bring together services away from the core and the access, supporting the new range of services we need to support our business and consumer lives. I'm delighted today to be joined by two people with such a wide variety of experience across the communications, cloud, and other industries that are going to help us understand what this multi-service edge is and what we need to be doing, what we're bringing to the market to address the issues of the industry. By the end of this episode, you'll know our guests really well. But let's get a brief introduction from Jim and Anna to set us on our way.
Hi, Chris. I'm Anna Wielosz, Senior Director of Product Management at Juniper, responsible for service provider edge routing, as well as solutions and automation.
Oh, come on, Anna. You're far too modest. Tell us more about your broad industry experience.
I have been in networking area for a long time, and what drives me, basically, it's really, advancing networking technologies, building the networks for tomorrow. And, across years, I started with service provider, working at Bell Canada, building the networks, actually, understanding the real operational complexity, then moving through different roles at equipment providers, as well, most recently working at Google and facing cloud networking compliance, for example, problem statements. So solving those problems is what keeps me going.
Thank you, Anna. And Jim, how about yourself? I gather you're a returnee to the Juniper fold. Please introduce yourself.
Yes. Hi, Chris. My name is Jim Bianco. I am Director of Product Management here at Juniper. And as you mentioned, I am a returnee to Juniper. I had the privilege of launching the MX960 MSE platform to market many years ago. I then left Juniper to go to a startup opportunity. I rejoined Juniper and I'm excited to rejoin Juniper because one of my passions, quite honestly, is the product management side. There is no more exciting part of the networking industry, in my opinion, than the multi-services edge, because that's where the services take place. And that's why I was so excited to come back to Juniper to get the opportunity to introduce new technologies and new solutions into the marketplace.
That's great. Thanks, Jim. So, listener, as you can see, we have a vast amount of experience to draw upon today. So let's begin to delve into the topic of the multi-service edge. Before we go into the nitty-gritty of the products and how the whole thing is evolving, can you perhaps help set the scene for the listener by talking about some of the challenges you see for the CSPs, what's changing, and what that whole CSP environment looks like today? Anna.
Yes, absolutely. One thing we can state about the networks is that there is a constant change. The services we are seeing today have not been there yesterday. We are talking about virtual reality. We are talking about IoT, smart cities, and even further, when we look at the whole networking industry is now putting energy into deploying 5G. But do we really know what kind of services 5G is going to bring? Not necessarily, right? What we know, though, is that CSPs, they have to make the choice today what they are deploying in their networks, and that the choice that they are making today will stick with them for 5 years, 10 years, and it has to basically support anything that the innovation and the technology will bring for tomorrow. So they are making those bets, and at Juniper, we are making those bets too. So seeing the diversification and different pressure points in the networks, we took the strategy of building the right silicon for the right job. And especially what we see is that aggregated speeds and throughputs, those growths materialized even more than what we were predicting. They are really pressuring the core. And we are building there for throughput efficiency and power. And on the other side, what we see is that on the edge, we have all those new services instantiating with logical scale and flexibility. And we are making the bet to build silicon specifically for those needs. And Edge is very complex, and I'm very excited to see all the innovation that we are bringing in this market. And I'm really excited about the innovation and what Juniper has to offer in the multi-service edge area.
Yes, it's very inconsiderate of the world, isn't it, to expect more and more from the communications platform and all the things that we build something which is supposedly future-proof. But I think you make a really interesting point there, which we often forget when we get caught up in the hype. And Edge is in a subject which we have definitely had a lot of hype around, and people assume that everything's going to happen now. But actually, as we build out fiber, as we build out 5G and then 6G, this is a long-term investment. It's a 10, even 20, 30 year. So we really need to focus on that long-term sustainable investment and make sure we don't get carried away with the more urgent hype, which is perhaps we've been guilty of in, let's say, in the internet era. Now, Jim, as Anna's described there, it's complicated, right? There's a lot of technology going on. But this multi-service edge, what is different at the multi-service edge area compared to the core and the access routing area?
Yeah, very good points that you made there, Chris. I appreciate that, and I'm going to wind that back in. But to directly answer your question, what's different from the multi-service edge perspective is first compared to what? Well, it's compared to, as you stated earlier, is the access and the core. In the access portions of the WAN infrastructure and in the core, it's much more about packet processing, basically quickly processing and routing the packets onto their next destination. What's different from the multi-service edge is in the name, the service. Instead of focusing just on the packet, it is much more about deploying, metering, assigning policies to the actual service, not just the packet. So we operate at higher layers of the networking stacks. So what does this mean? Well, it means many different things have to go on effectively at the same time to those flows to allow the different services to be deployed, which happens in many different places in the network. The multi-service edge is a function, not a single location in the network. But effectively, we have to, in the multi-service edge operations, optimize many different attributes at the same time. Certainly throughput and performance is important. Certainly power efficiency is important. But most important aspects are those about the session, those about the various subscribers, whether it be a broadband access subscriber or whether it be a layer 2 MPLS or whether it be Ethernet VPN service. And each of those services has many subcategories. This concept of scale is probably the biggest and the most difficult to deal with in the multi-service edge. Add to that the consistent requirements by the CSPs, the communication service providers, to collapse what used to be multiple networks down to fewer. So the MSE devices have to do more and more at higher degrees of scale. That is why Juniper invests in custom silicon for this segment of the networking industry. Quite honestly, other vendors in the industry basically build one processor for all of the various operations, and this is by definition a compromise. So in order to handle those multiple attributes at the same time, Juniper takes a different approach. We actually have an architecture for our packet forwarding engines that is multi-core and single chip. All right, that allows us to be very flexible, literally the highest scalability of the attributes I mentioned in the industry. So that is what it really makes the multi-service edge different, and our approach is unique in the industry.
And I think you've clarified for me there one of the issues that I know a lot of the industry struggles with this, what is the edge, who owns it, how do we service it? And what you're saying is it's a function because you're bringing together different assets, different services required at different times. As you said, for the consumer market, the business market, society, smart cities, all of these things have different requirements. And in some ways, it's sort of a maturation of the industry, isn't it? It's a growing up of the industry where we used to make people fit their requirements into the way that the technology was designed, and this is a much more flexible, ground up set of services which actually can adapt to the way that people want to use it.
Anna said it in the beginning. The only constant is change. And certainly if the last 2 years with the pandemic has taught us anything, a massive amount of change. So yes, it continues to change. And as you said, how dare the industry forces us to accommodate new things they want to do. But that agility for the unknown is a goal that everyone strives for. And quite honestly, it is a design parameter for our engineers, our development personnel.
Indeed, yeah. And Anna, can I come back to you? We touched upon there this notion of logical scale and flexibility. Why is it critical to support that, as Jim mentioned, right down in the silicon?
Yeah, the silicon really has to be purpose-built for that, because as we were talking throughout different service types, they bring different encapsulations, they bring different technologies, protocols into that silicon. But, just stepping back and thinking about what's happening in the service edge and what that silicon needs to do. Service edge is where the endpoint lives, right? That's where customer awareness lives. So what does it mean? It means that the endpoint, logical endpoint, will require the encapsulation of the day, right? Different service require different encapsulations. Customers may have multiple generations of the networks. So that's one point. Then, when we go into that service endpoint, we need to provide SLA, right? What is the service level agreement? Me, as a service provider, I want to build the customer. I need to see the statistics. The customer wants to see what they are built for. They need to see statistics. So you add on the top of each of those endpoints multiple counters and flows and sampling that is needed to operate that edge. Now, on the top of it, adding security because I need to filter, right, the traffic on per endpoint. Policy because I need to route the traffic as per this particular service requires. So it brings a lot of granular functions that may be very different on per endpoint at the scale of tens of thousands of or hundreds of thousands of endpoints.
Like I say, it is interesting, isn't it, that we sort of we think we're moving away from the hardware-based network in the way we designed them in the past, but actually, but we are definitely. I think the word that came out very clearly to me then was logical. The logical place that these things fit, the logical way in which we look at this. So we're abstracting it away from the physical, and we're looking at the logical way. And there's so many more information flows and data flows than we ever had before, and that's the importance of this.
That's exactly it. And many complex functions are implemented in software and in data centers, but the network segmentations is always going to be required because basically you want to provide that private networking experience per customer, and that's what's driving those logical endpoints. So now, what does it mean to the silicon, right? Do you build it the same way as you would build data center silicon? No, because now you need those multiple processor cores that process the packets with potentially different processing paths. So that's what we do. On a single chip, we have multiple processor cores that process the packet to completion, and that provides ultimate flexibility to the packet processing and microcode programmability so that you can basically introduce future technologies, exactly talking to this agility for the unknown, so that microcode is capable to the point of even being capable of machine learning. And another point, when we talk about those counters, we need to build into this silicon massive amount of memory. But not only it needs to be a lot of memory, but it also needs to be dynamically allocated for services, because again, for this unknown, we don't know what kind of mixes of services are going to be per different service providers and how they are going to evolve in time, so that allocation of the resources per services needs to be very dynamic. And the last point I want to make is that backward and forward compatibility. When that new technology comes and we need to implement it in the networks, the whole network needs to be enabled, right? Which means it may not be only the latest and the greatest of the silicon chipset, but also the previous ones. And that's what Trio provides basically with the evolution of the chipset throughout the years.
And it's that change, isn't it, where we brought in a new network in the past and we had an expectation of new revenue flows. And this is much more about the sustainability, the long-term sustainability of the CSPs and what they deliver. Because as you said, they don't know what they're going to deliver. It's going to be any number of variety of services in the consumer or the business markets. And I think from that, you've now helped the listener understand the importance of silicon in the MSE design. What about the other functions around that are important?
Yeah, exactly. Silicon is the foundation, but silicon is not everything. The silicon builds the system. The system is part of networking ecosystem. So that system has to communicate with different protocols. So you need the right operating system around that. And for MX is Junos that enables this feature-rich experience and operational simplicity for customers. Another very important point of delivering services is security. Edge is often, the first place in the network where that security is implemented for the service or in service-aware mode. So functions like DDoS with flexible filtering and functions like encryption for every service are absolutely critical. And the last but not least is actually how do I instantiate those services at scale and how do I manage it? And that comes through the automation portfolio, including service assurance that can actually throughout the life cycle of the service provide me the experience that I want to deliver to the customers.
So it requires a lot more coordination, doesn't it, between elements that we might have seen as being separate in the past, and that overlying you touched upon the area of operations and bringing it all together. We can have the best technology in the world, but if we don't operate it efficiently and we don't, to your point earlier, but automate it enough, then we will really struggle as we build things out in the future.
That's exactly it, and that's why automation is critical. Operation basically makes it scale.
Exactly. Yeah. Now, Jim, back to you. So you talked about your history with Juniper and disappearing off to do some adventure and coming back in onto the product side. Can you provide us an overview of the MX product area?
Yes, absolutely. The MX product line is, as we've said, a MultiService Edge platform. And quite honestly, it is one of the premier franchise networking products in the industry, and there's not many. So we're very proud of that fact. Part of this is because it is truly a decathlon athlete type product in the portfolio. It can do many things very well. So it optimizes on a multitude of operations, which is required for a multi-service device. So in the context, though, of the product line, we have certainly many different platforms within the systems, within the MX portfolio. Some of the newer ones that we're going to be talking about a little bit more here is the MX10K modular portfolio. And the newest line card and the one that uses the Trio 6.0 technology that we've referred to already today is a 9.6 terabit line card for the MX10K portfolio. The MX10K portfolio is 800 gigabit capable. So the chassis themselves are capable of 800 gig interfaces at high density. What we have now and very proud of and newly introduced is the 9.6 terabit line card. This is capable of 24 400 gig ports. It can also be implemented at 100 gig port speeds. So we're very proud of this card, which is our latest card in those platforms. In addition to that, we have recently launched the MX10004 chassis, a new chassis within the MX10K modular portfolio. It, of course, uses the 9.6 terabit line card that I previously just mentioned. And both of these platforms, the MX10K8 and the MX10K4, have many other line cards that can be installed in the system. Now, I'd like to take the opportunity to talk about one other product that we're very proud of. It is a new product in the portfolio. It is an MX304. This is a 2RU system, so very small 2RU form factor. It is offered in multiple variations, but there is a 3.2 terabit capacity, fully redundant routing engines, and of course cards, so multi-port. To my knowledge, this is the highest density, highest performance multi-service edge product in the industry, so thus being in a 2RU platform. There is also a version of the product that can be deployed as a 4.8 terabit capacity. This utilizes a non-redundant configuration, but especially for certain applications, especially in the cloud arena, this becomes a very, very powerful product for many of our customers.
So that's really interesting. So we started the discussion with Anna talking about, what's going on, the change in requirements, and we've dropped down into the silicon and the technology and the new products we've launched. But how are you seeing CSPs sort of introducing the MSE to the routers today? What examples do you have, and what are you seeing from the market?
Yeah. It's a great question, because that's what this is all about, right? Is how are our CSPs and all of our customers using these platforms, and to do what for their end customers. In the industry, MSE platforms are while they connotate communication service provider use cases, and that's where they're very widely deployed. The reality is MSE platforms are deployed throughout all segments of the industry. They also go into the hypercloud and the access cloud side of the networks, as well as, quite honestly, we have many enterprise customers that deploy MSE platforms for services types of deliveries, but because of the flexibility of the MSE platforms, oftentimes they go into even other areas. So let's get a little bit more specific. What do I mean by that? Well, we're very lucky. The MX platform is actually a franchise product. We have over 3,000 customers, and these are certainly name brand customers that you would all recognize, companies like Telefonica, Orange. And if we talk about some of the use cases, I mentioned cloud providers, hypercloud, as well as the category of cloud customers that provide access services to get onto the SaaS services of the cloud. These would be companies like Equinix. One of our companies is the Netherlands Internet Exchange, right? That's the hub for access to the internet. So these are companies that obviously deploy access to all the services that is the newer way of networking. While it is not an MSE application specifically, it is very similar, and that's another use case that complements what a standard multi-service edge application is for a traditional communication service provider, again, like a Telefonica, like an Orange, who use it literally to deploy BNG types of services, which is broadband access gateway types of operations, business services, MPLS, L2, L3, or Ethernet VPLS services to customers. So it really is a wide variety of use cases that customers deploy MSE platforms in.
No, it's fascinating. I think as an analyst, I'm always tracking how the telecom industry evolves, but increasingly we have to take account of how the hyperscalers play, the cloud players, large enterprises, and Lord knows who else. Anna, might I just put one final question to you, actually? When you're looking at this from a product development side, I mean, it must be so exciting seeing all these demands coming in and trying to apply, the power of the technology. I mean, is it like, are you like a child in a sweet shop? You're out there every day thinking we can do new things, we can build new services. It's just such an exciting time, isn't it?
Actually, yes, absolutely. And, not only seeing this innovation and seeing what we are bringing to the market, it's super exciting, but just working every day with engineering and brainstorming on the capabilities, what we can bring to the market and how networking can enable, the operations of our customers is fantastic. So, of course, I love being in this industry, and seeing this innovation is great.
I think it's also that the innovation coming from other areas, the fact that, we used to design things in the telecom industry just for the telecom industry, but now this connectivity explosion that we're witnessing really touches every part of society. And I think that's what's most exciting. Anna and Jim, thank you so much for joining us today on Get Connected.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chris. Thank you, Anna.
So there you have it, listener. I think we've all benefited from this experience and insight and the understanding about how the multi-service edge is evolving. What silicon does to bring the raw power up, but specifically addresses the requirements of that multi-service edge, and how that builds towards this much better position, a longer-term, sustainable communication service provider environment.
Now all that remains is a few thank yous. Thank you to Juniper for the opportunity to dig into such an interesting subject, and thank you to you too for listening. I look forward to talking to you again soon.
You've been listening to Get Connected. You've heard from us, now we'd love to hear from you. Tell us what you think via Twitter using the handle @Juniper Networks. And if you like what you've heard, remember to tell your colleagues and friends. Thanks for listening to Get Connected.